I'm Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House.
And this is Devyn Caldwell from Our Philly Row. And we're the hosts of True Tales from Old Houses. Hey, Stacy, how's it going?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I have a funny thing to tell you about today. I don't know if it's going to come across in recording, but you know how weird things always happen on my street? I feel like every time we're recording, something strange is happening. Today, they're paving. They're paving my street today.
Oh, great. Just in time for recording, right?
Yeah, exactly. The street sweeper came by, which I find so charming. There's something about a street sweeper.
Yes. We don't have those in Philadelphia.
We have the cleanest streets in New York, I have determined. Anyway, the sweeper came by, but it didn't occur to me that they were paving too. And our street's a mess. I appreciate the paving, but, a little notice flyer would have been nice.
Yeah.
We're just going to go for it. We're going to have that little, maybe the quaint sound of a cottage podcast with the sound of vehicles backing up and the roller going over.
We will make it work.
We will make it work. What are you doing in Philadelphia right now?
Haven't really been doing a lot. Not really sure what to say here. Let me.
I don't believe you because I know our hours get filled, but if you don't have anything for old house stuff, I get it.
Nothing that's very exciting, honestly. I'm getting ready to hang some shelves in the dining room for an expanded pantry. Not terribly exciting, but very, very needed.
You say it's not exciting, but you're speaking my language. Anytime you're talking about, organization or display, that's right up my alley. I'm into that.
Well, we bought some shelves at the beginning of the pandemic, which is like a unit of 5 shelves from the big box store. And when you fill it up, there's still like 8 inches of space between the top of what's on the shelf and the next shelf. And that's all wasted space. So we picked up some IKEA upper cabinets I'm going to mount on the wall and then buy additional shelves from IKEA. And then we'll be able to have shelves that are like can height.
Oh, that's so smart.
So we can just pack it in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about this all day. Some people like, the decoration. I'm like, let's talk about your soup cans. How do you arrange those? Alphabetically?
Labels out for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I'm kind of finishing project mode here. Pretty much the same thing that I was doing last episode, although I did make a little progress. My daughter's room, she and I hung a mural, which turned out kind of cute.
It looks amazing.
Thank you. I feel like I could just leap right into it.
Yeah.
And take a hike. I love it. I do have an article about it on the blog, Blake Hill House. And we also finished the dumpster desk.
Yes.
Goodness, I'm making it sound like I'm accomplishing more than I really am, but it is nice to check off those 2 projects because they were, the desk itself was just one of those really detail-oriented and sort of time-consuming projects. None of it was difficult. It was just like, fix it, let it dry. Fix it, let it dry.
Yeah.
Lots of time in between each task.
But worth it in the end, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I would love, love, love to get her moved into her room by the end of the month. And so that's kind of the goal that keeps me going, even though there's quite a few things that need to be done. But I'm just going to take it day by day. So we do have announcements today. Why don't you tell us what's happening, Devyn?
Well, first, just a reminder that we have a new Facebook group and page. If you are a Facebook user, we'd love to have you join and tell your friends about it too.
Right. It's new. So we haven't really developed it a whole lot, but it's there. It's just waiting for all of you.
Yeah, and we'd love the input from you. We're also excited to announce that we'll be selling True Tales from Old Houses merchandise during the month of October. We're planning a few fun items which are still being worked out, but it's really exciting and I'm looking forward to it.
I am too, and I think our plan is to sell in October, ship in November, so you can have holiday presents in December, I believe, is kind of our thinking behind that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Also, coming up in September, we're going to begin recording our ghost story episodes. If you have an old house ghost story or you'd like to be a guest on True Tales from Old Houses, please contact us via the website, Facebook, or Instagram.
Every October, since we started, really, we do ghost story episodes, and it's always a lot of fun. We're looking for, we can take any ghost stories, but we keep it lighthearted, so it's not super scary or gory or anything. That's not the purpose of it. It's just a lot of people who have old houses feel like they have had these experiences within them, and we're all about hearing that story.
Absolutely.
The last announcement I guess I have is it's actually clarification from the Q&A portion of last episode. And, I was really afraid to do that topic because I just knew it was going to come back. I just knew it. I was just waiting. But anyway, during episode 35, I talked about homeowners insurance. And actually, it was very nice. I got a wonderful message from Kristen Barrow, who is currently a state-level insurance regulator. She sent me an email, and she was outlining some of the ways that homeowners can be sure that they get the right coverage for their needs. And I want to admit again that I didn't touch on everything that my agent discussed with me for that episode because I kind of thought it was too much information for a shorter Q&A segment. Anyway, during that segment, I never talked about insuring the contents of your house, which is really important, reporting safety and cosmetic upgrades that you make to your house, reporting those to your agent. So if you add an addition or if you do something really nice, because if you have a problem and you didn't report those changes, then you may not have coverage that you expected.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So that's kind of a big deal. Well, it's a very big deal. Also, I didn't really talk about how to make sure you get coverage for the special architectural features in your house. So those are things that just didn't come up during that Q&A, but I did discuss some of those things with my own insurance agent. So I'm sorry I left those out. But fortunately, after reading Kristen's email, I discovered that really the only major mistake that I made was talking about the form numbers. I mainly talked about things called HO5s, HO3s, and it turns out that those form numbers really can be state specific or even company specific. So it's best probably not to start your conversation with your agent there. Upon further reflection, considering everything that Kristen said, the takeaway still remains that you should talk to your agent about what you want and need, understand what you're getting, which is most important, and finally, review your insurance coverage regularly so you do not get a terrible surprise should you ever need to file a claim. And I just want to say thank you again to Kristen Barrow for taking the time to keep us. Oh, I just realized I made a poem. So here's a poem for you, Kristen. Thank you again to Kristen Barrow for taking the time to keep us on the straight and narrow.
That's great.
That was totally an inadvertent poem, but I'm leaving it in.
There you go. Absolutely.
Thanks, Kristen.
What is today's question, Stacy?
All right, I always say this is a good one. They're all good ones. Just like my children. I love them all. All right, anyway.
Equally,
right. Today's question is, what do you wish you knew about the process of old house ownership, such as purchasing, restoration, budgeting? What do you wish you knew before you got to this point, I suppose? And how would you do things differently if you could do it all over again? Do you want to start?
Sure. I'll talk about the purchasing portion, address that initially. We bought our house a few years ago, and I have to admit that I allowed my excitement for our house to cloud my judgment and some underlying issues. Part of what made our house special is that unlike the tens of thousands of other row houses in my neighborhood, ours had not been gut rehabbed and turned into a sheetrock box. It had most of its original interior intact. That said, it had most of its original interior intact, and it's 167 years old. So there were some problems that I didn't address at the time of purchase that I could have gone back to the owner and negotiated a bit more. Unfortunately, after the fact, and after we had the keys, they had to be addressed immediately. And we ended up spending an additional, I think we spent about 12% of our purchase price to resolve those issues. And that was in the first 60 days of ownership.
Right.
Structural issues, some of it I blogged about on my blog a few years back. Structural issues, knob and tube wiring because we couldn't get insurance.
Right.
So definitely when it comes to buying an old house again, I'm going to do more due diligence on it. So our inspector actually missed a few things, which even added to the costs that we needed to do. And unfortunately, in the fine print of the agreement, they are not liable for these things that they missed. But he did hint at something about the structural issue that I didn't really I took it with a grain of salt, and I shouldn't have. And that cost us.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question. I mean, inspectors miss things. They're human. They do that sort of thing. What do you think you could have known? I mean, now you know. So if you moved into another brick home at another time, you would automatically be looking for the same things that were problems probably in this row house, right?
I would have brought a structural engineer in to get an inspection before buying the house because there were some noticeable issues that I think I glossed over.
Okay.
My rose-tinted glasses didn't see just how bad some of the cracks were in the brick. When it comes to like the other items, restoration, we're still in that process and I'm doing the best I can to do my due diligence on it. So far, that has worked out okay.
We had a pretty good inspector, so we didn't really get stuck on that kind of stuff, fortunately. I mean, most everything we knew, oh yeah, that's falling apart. Yep, we're going to need a new one of those right away. We kind of lucked out in that department. But I think a few things that I would have thought about are probably more practical maybe than other people think about. But I wish I'd known how difficult it was going to be to keep a house this size clean. I mean, it could be a full-time job. It could.
It was when it was built.
That's true. It's just insanity to me how long it takes to clean it, to keep it clean. And then you would pretty much just keep on starting over, just cycle on through it. Another thing I kind of wish we'd known is like maybe how much space we actually use. And that has to do with the size of this house. We were looking for space. We were thinking the winters here are really long. We're going to have to be inside a lot and we don't want to be on top of each other. But each one of us uses the space a little differently. And there are rooms and places that we don't use and don't need. And I find that so interesting. After living here, I find that I love a big kitchen. Love it. Never had a big kitchen. I have one now, what I consider a big kitchen. And I love it. And I love my big bedroom. And so there are things that if I were looking for a house next time, an old house again, that I would know to be looking for, that I didn't realize that I should be thinking about this time around. And I guess everybody has those situations. It comes with experience. So what I would do differently is I would probably buy a smaller house, honestly. Mm-hmm. Everybody has their own bedroom here, which is nice. We've never lived in a house where everyone had their own bedroom, and that's been a lot of fun. But obviously my kids aren't going to live, well, obviously, maybe it's obvious. They're not going to live with me forever. I don't know. I kind of think maybe some of them will live with me forever. Maybe I will need a big house. No, I want to say that the advice that I would give to anyone, and this has served us well, regardless of the house we buy, is to understand the systems within your house that you are buying. And by that, I mean, if you are buying a house with a septic system, then the first thing you should be doing is understanding how a septic system works.
Yes.
How it functions, how to take care of it. If you're moving to city water, know what that means, what you can flush, what you can't flush. And then another thing, heating system is a huge one. Do you have forced air? Do you have radiators? Knowing how those systems work, because a lot of times that's where the breakdown happens. You know, when you have a failure, it's because a lot of times we don't know how to keep them in their best operating condition, and then we get stuck with thousands of dollars of repairs or upgrades or something. So that's probably my best advice, is just to really go into it understanding what you're purchasing.
That's definitely important for sure.
So if I were to talk about budgeting, I will say that with this house, we got pretty much everything I expected. I mean, I expected the worst. And I don't mean, I'm not a negative person. I don't normally think that, but I kind of went into this project with the idea that a lot of major things were going to happen and things were going to be very expensive to fix. And sometimes I've gotten pleasantly surprised. So I don't know if I was realistic or fatalistic, some sort of istic. I'm not sure what kind of istic I was, but for once in my life, I did not get blindsided by something crazy.
I will throw in one thing about budgeting is you have to consider how much it's going to cost to heat and cool your home.
Oh my gosh. I'm glad you said that.
You know, a lot of folks buy big old houses and they don't realize that they may have energy bills that are $1,000 a month in the winter to heat. And that's true for some people.
Right. And that goes along with understanding your systems. And I actually have a note here because I was talking about my utilities. I have, my house is 4,600 square feet. I don't have any air conditioning. I do have forced air. I lived in a 1,700 square foot house in California with air conditioning and heat. And I pay less in my 4,600 square foot home for utilities than I did in my 1,700 square foot home in California. Part of that is region. the cost of utilities in my part of New York versus where I lived in California. The other thing is that I don't have air conditioning, which kind of stinks a few weeks out of the year, but other than that, it's not bad. But forced air, natural gas, is a lot less expensive to operate than a boiler system or, gosh, God forbid, heating oil. That stuff costs a small fortune to heat your house. So when you're and you're right. So when you're looking at your purchase price of your house, consider the system that you are getting. Inquire about those utility bills. That's a really important one. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it definitely is. I have to say, one of the perks of living in a row house is that 2 of our walls are shared, and therefore they're not exposed to the outside, and our heating bills are surprisingly reasonable given that we have 0 insulation in the house.
So your neighbors are insulating you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so smart. Just don't want to be the end row house.
This is true. This is true.
Interviewing today's guest was a solo endeavor with the delightful Leanne Wiseman. Unfortunately, you were unable to be there, Devyn.
No, unfortunately, I was actually at the doctor's office. The doctor was running late, so I couldn't get away.
Yes. Well, anyway, it ended up being a ladies-only chat about her gorgeous Queen Anne home and her collection of Flow Blue china. But we did miss you.
Oh, thanks. I wished I could have been there.
Yeah, we do too. Anyway, we've never really had a conversation on the podcast with a guest about antiques. So this is something a little new that we're doing. That's always an option, but we usually end up talking just mainly about houses. Leanne is a collector and very knowledgeable about Flow Blue. She's a really fun follow on Instagram, and you can find her via her username, Lady on Chestnut.
Hi, Stacy. I am Leanne Wiseman. I live outside of Pittsburgh, and you know me most often as Lady on Chestnut on Instagram. I live in a circa 1894 Queen Anne Victorian with my husband, and we've been here for a little over a year and a half.
Wow. Well, thank you, Leanne. Yes, I do know you from Instagram. You have a gorgeous house, cute little dogs, and it's nice to have you here on the show. I just want to say, too, that I'm sorry that Devyn couldn't be here. He had a last-minute appointment that ran long, and so it's just you and I today. We're just sitting down, having a conversation.
Sounds great.
I would like to know about your love of old houses. Like, has this always been your thing, or did you happen to just fall in love with your the house that you're living in now?
So it hasn't always been a thing. I will admit that I did get sucked into the farmhouse thing, and not like a real farmhouse, like that actual farmers live in, like the trendy thing, for a while, because I think I was kind of trying to find myself and figure out where I fit and the design style and things that I like. So no, I haven't always been into old houses. This is actually our 3rd house, and it's definitely the oldest. Our last house was a ranch from about the 1950s or 60s. And then the house before that was older, maybe from the 20s. But I didn't buy it because it was an old house. I bought it just because it was cute and had a picket fence. So really, the love of old houses and old things in general came from when I discovered Flow Blue. So that's kind of the thing that got me triggered into the old house land. And then I found this house. We searched forever and ever, it felt like, and we found this one, and I just kind of knew that this was it.
Tell me about how you found your house and what it's like.
Oh, gosh. When I decided that I really wanted to live in an old Victorian, the hunt was kind of on. We found a realtor, and I told her I don't want anything built after like this date. I really want to stay in the 1800s. I really want it to be a Victorian era house. So we searched and searched and searched, and we wanted to stay in the Pittsburgh city limits just because we love being close to downtown and going to the baseball games and all of that. And the more we looked around downtown, it was either they were ready to move in pretty decent shape and way out of our budget and super expensive, or they needed a ton of work, and we are not handy people at all. Like, I'm more handy than my husband is. And I mean, we're definitely willing to learn, but it was just so daunting, the amount of work that the houses that we could afford in the city needed. So I brought in my search, and we went about 35 minutes outside of the city, and found this house, and all the major stuff had just been done. A new roof, new plumbing, replastered walls. The knob and tube had been redone. He really redid almost everything. And when I saw how much of the house was untouched and still original, we were just like, this is it. This has to be it.
Right. Have you regretted your decision to live 30 minutes outside Pittsburgh, or has it worked out really well?
As I'm driving to and from work in the morning, yes. But, in the long run, overall, no. No, we're used to driving. We're not from Pennsylvania. So anywhere we go to see friends and family, it's always at least a 6-hour drive. So really, it's really been okay.
I think you and I have similar lives in that way. We've always had to drive a really far distance. When I lived in California, believe it or not, I lived very rurally. So I always had to drive about 40 minutes just even to the real big time grocery store. Mm-hmm. When people around here say, oh, it's 20 minutes away, that's so far, I think, oh, it's just right down the road.
We get that all the time here. People have to go one town over. They're like, it's so far. I'm like, what do you mean it's so far? It's 15 minutes.
That's funny. All right. So when you found your house and like you said, a lot of the systems were already in place, which was great. So what kind of work did you find yourselves responsible for at that stage?
The main thing when we moved in is this house had been vacant and sitting completely empty. I don't even think the air was on for like a year. So in the basement, there was just black mold everywhere. So that was kind of the number one concern. And it had started creeping up into the kitchen, and there was some mold on the doors. So the very first thing that we did was get mold remediation in here and just get it cleaned up so we could move in. That's really the first thing we had to do. And then after that, it was more decorating and getting it kind of like how I wanted to look until we lived in it long enough to figure out what actually really needed to be worked on, like the porch and, peeling paint and windows that are rotten and things like that. After we lived in it for about almost a year, we kind of started to see, okay, these are the actual things that really need to get addressed.
Let's talk about your windows, because I'm into those. But your house has beautiful stained glass windows, among other things. And they're sash windows, right? Or are they fixed windows? Or both?
Both. They're both.
Did you fall in love with those windows at all? Or were you thinking, oh, that looks like a lot of work to maintain those?
Both. I had seen a picture actually from 2 listings ago where they were cracked. And so I think the previous owner did also get those fixed. And you can tell where some of the stained glass has been matched as close to possible color-wise. So it had been fixed a little bit. So they weren't in terrible shape, but I loved it. Like the second we came in and I saw that big window on the landing, I was like, oh, put a chair up. Like, this is where I'm going to live. This is it right here. So yeah, I do love them.
If possible, I'd love to put a picture of those stained glass windows on the landing on the show notes for this episode.
Sure.
They're really special. I think that our listeners would love to see them too.
Yes. And I always wonder about if they thought, because the Victorians thought of everything. And I always sit there and wonder if they positioned it on the side of the house, knowing the sun was going to rise and how all the light was going to come in. I always think about that kind of thing when I'm sitting there. So
I suspect the answer is yes. After touring a lot of different houses, a lot of old houses, I'm finding that they really were good planners when it came to putting beautiful elements in the house. They really were thinking about those things. Why bother putting something so gorgeous on the side of the house with no light in it? Now, I noticed that your house, now I know it's a registered landmark. I'm not sure, is it also on the National Register of Historic Places? Or was that you, or was it already that designated as such?
So locally, it was not a registered landmark. So I did that application myself. And honestly, it really wasn't that intensive. And I got that done myself. My house is I'm trying to say this correctly. My house is part of the historic district where I live. And the historic district where I live is on the National Register. So my house is on the register as part of a historic district neighborhood.
Right. And that was already the case when you bought it? It was already in the historic district?
Yes, I believe it was put on the National Register. The district was in the 80s. So it's been on for a while.
Right. What was the benefit, or what was your motivation for getting it, for it becoming a registered landmark versus just being a part of the historic district?
I think that, I don't know. I just think that my house is like, it's special. And all the houses that I drive by, honestly, we walk through the neighborhood and we walk the dogs. And I look at all the houses that have the plaque on it and I'm like, well, that house isn't any better than mine. Like, why doesn't mine have a plaque? Why doesn't mine have a plaque? So my house deserves to be recognized as being old and special too. So why not? And I know the money goes to benefit the local historical society. So that was also, I'm like, I'm okay with that.
Right. Can you share the history of your house, or will that be too identifying to you and your house?
It's fine. I don't mind. We moved in here not knowing anything. I was kind of excited to go to closing because I was going to ask the owner all these questions and all of these things, and they weren't even at closing. So it was just the paperwork and the real estate agent. And funny, if you're buying an old house, the things people will do to get houses to sell is very interesting. Like when we came to see this house, there was a big portrait of this little girl on an easel. And I was like, oh my gosh, who is this? Like, she must be important to the house because she's out and she's right in the foyer. And his agent was like, well, he found this picture of this girl in the attic when they were redoing the house. And I was like, oh, I wonder who she is. And well, when I came, the picture was gone when we closed. And I was like, well, where did she go if she belongs to the house? And we have a strange situation where we have a duplex right behind our house. It used to be the sheep shed.
Oh.
And it got burned down. And in the 80s, the owners of this house rebuilt it to be a duplex. And the owner's stepdaughter, when we moved in, was still renting in the duplex. So I spoke to her. She was my source of a lot of information about the house. I was like, who was that little girl in the picture? And she was like, well, he got that at an antique store. It was like kind of a story he used to create interest in the house. And I was like, oh.
Okay, that seems a little shady. I don't know.
Yeah, I was like, that kind of hurts my feelings, but
right,
whatever.
Right. You were all excited about thinking it was some sort of historic piece of the puzzle for your house found in the attic, and you were going to find out all about it.
Correct. And then so I was back at square nothing.
Right.
I kind of took it upon myself to start researching and digging around. And the first place I went was to the deeds office, and I found all the names. I have been able to find that the people who had our house built were Irish immigrants, and they were Patrick and Sadie Biggins. And a lot of the area where I live, people came because of oil and gas. And so that's why he was here. He wasn't listed as an oil producer.
Okay.
I actually had, when the lady came to give me the landmark plaque for the house, she said, there's a couple George Barber houses in the area. And there was a man in Ohio that was researching houses to try to verify which ones were George Barber pattern houses. And your house was on the list for him to investigate and confirm it or not confirm it. I was like, okay. So I actually joined a George Barber interest group on Facebook. And I posted that there was a man in Ohio who had been searching for Barber houses and trying to confirm them if they were or were not. And this guy messaged and said, hey, I think that's my friend, the guy in Ohio she was talking about. That's my friend. And I said, well, can you give me his information? So I emailed him, and he did email me back, and he was like, that was me. And he said, your house is not a Barber house, which I didn't think it was. But he said it's definitely an architect designed house by looking at it. So I was like, well, that's interesting. He said it probably was an architect from the city in Pittsburgh who designed it. I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Am I talking too much?
No, you're fine. You're fine. My in-laws live in a house that everybody thinks it's a Frank Lloyd Wright house. They think, oh, it was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And it was in that time period, but indeed it was not a Frank Lloyd Wright. So that's probably the same situation with your house. The George Barker looked like a George Barker house.
Yeah.
Barber. I said Barker. I'm sorry. Now I got to say that over again. All right. That's probably the case with yours looking like a house designed by George Barber.
Yes. You were asking about the history of my house.
I was. So you were telling me that it was built by Irish immigrants who were in the oil business. And so tell me more about that family.
I really am trying to find so much more about them because they only lived in this house from 1889 to 1899. It was like a 10-year span, and that was it. I can't find pictures. I can't find family. I can't find anything about them. I found their marriage certificate, and that's about it. The next family down the line is who I have most of my information about and who I post about. I found their family on Ancestry.com.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, I put all the names from all the deeds in there, and I found family trees of people that had the names of the owners of my homes in their family trees. And I said, do you happen to be related to this person that used to live in my house? And the great grandson said, yes, that's my mom's family that lived in that house. And I said, oh my gosh. So they've sent me pictures. They've told me about them. That's really the family that I know the most about. And they lived in this house and kept it in their family and passed it down from son to daughter and all that for about 40 years.
Oh, that's really neat. So what was the original family's name? You said the Biggins? Their last name was Biggins?
Patrick and Sadie Biggins.
Patrick and Sadie Biggins. Maybe there's somebody out there that can solve this mystery about Patrick and Sadie Biggins.
Yes, help.
Our content is pretty evergreen, so this will be up forever. And if it doesn't come about now, maybe some years down the road, somebody will be listening and they'll think, all right, I know that family.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's switch topics because you mentioned earlier, one of the things that I know about you the most, in fact, it may have been, I can't even remember when I became acquainted with you, but it was immediately clear to me that you liked a particular style of pottery or china, I guess, called Flow Blue. Normally we just talk about houses on this podcast, but because you have such an avid interest and you are knowledgeable about the subject, and a lot of our listeners also like antiques and other old things, I thought we could spend a portion of our discussion talking about Flow Blue. Are you up for that?
Sure.
Okay. Let's start by you telling us what in the world is Flow Blue?
So I'm going to try to do this the best I can because I do not consider myself a professional. So I always usually confer to my fellow club members when I have questions. But Flow Blue is, I think the earliest piece of Flow Blue was dated to around 1835. And it was made in a response to kind of mimic the Chinese pottery that was coming out. And I believe it was more affordable and attainable. So they were trying to mimic something like that people could have, that weren't just rich and royalty. And it just kind of took off. So Flow Blue, the reason why it's flowy, and I had to write this down because it's sciencey, the flowing effect was caused by adding lime or chloride of ammonia in the firing of the glaze. That would, sciencey things would happen in there inside the sag or in the kiln, and it would just cause it to flow and have this blurry effect.
Okay.
In the early Victorian era, like the 1830s to the 60s about, it was all made of really thick, heavy ironstone, and it was really dark and flowy and beautiful. And it really took off like when the American middle class was formed with the Industrial Revolution. People had jobs and were having more money, and the middle class was like, I want fancy dishes too. So Flow Blue actually wasn't for like the rich and the affluent. It was really for people like the American middle class to kind of have fancy dinners and things like that.
Was it American? Was it English? Where did it start? And is it from all over the world, or tell me more about that?
It's mostly from England. That's where kind of all of the bulk of it was made. But there's also a few American potteries that did make it, maybe 3, but they were always trying to kind of copycat and keep up with what the English were making. And I know that some of the potteries, like in Wheeling, West Virginia, actually bought their clay from the English potteries because it was like the good clay. And there's German Flow Blue, there's other countries that made it, but really the bulk of it did come from England.
So are there particular patterns, like china patterns, that you like or that people collect, or is it mainly just the fact that it's flow blue that is the important part? Or a little both, maybe. I don't know.
It's a little of both. I think when you start off collecting, when you get so excited when you see it, you just buy whenever you see. Like, oh, it's flow blue. I'm so excited. I'm going to buy it all. But once you get more into the collecting of it, you start to recognize the patterns. You start to pick up on the different potters and their styles, and you kind of streamline what you like. And then so you start collecting certain patterns, certain potters, things like that. Some people collect by piece. There are people that only collect butter pats, like the little teeny tiny things that were made to put butter.
Huh. How about you? What do you collect?
I really, really like the early Victorian, the thick, heavy, dark, flowy stuff that's very angular and more harsh looking. But it's still beautiful. And I really, really, really like to collect the early stuff. But there are a few late Victorian patterns. And late Victorian is very different from the early because it's thinner. It's more like a semi-porcelain, not a thick ironstone. And it has scalloped edges. And the patterns are more like floral and pretty and influenced by nature. And so there are a couple early. Chapeau is an early flow blue pattern that I like. And then there's late patterns that I like. One called Keel, which is really cute. And
how do you spell that? Kiel?
Keele.
Oh, I spelled that all wrong. And how about the would you say chapeau?
Yes, it's Chapoo.
Okay. Are those the thick, heavy stuff that you're talking about? Those two patterns?
Yeah.
Very neat. So do you collect all pieces like dishes and pitchers and butter pats? Or are you looking for a full collection of anything or just bits and pieces of whatever catches your eye?
I would love to get a full collection. A lot of people focus on like they want a service for 8 or a service for 12 or whatever. So I really, really would like to get my hands on like at least a service for 8 of a full pattern. And I do have a friend in the club who has a huge lot of chapeau sitting in a closet, and I'm slowly buying pieces. Hopefully one day I'll be able to eventually buy it all. So, but it's great when you can see a set that has been kept together for all these years. It's really cool.
Right. I imagine. Do you use them? Do you bring them out and serve your food on them or serve your friends?
I do. And everyone's like, I can't believe you use it. Or they come over and they're like, I'm so scared to use this. But I keep reminding them like most of what was made was exported to America for the middle class to use every day. It was made to be used. So I'm going to use it. And there's actually people in the club, and I'm not promoting this or anything, but there's people in the club who put their Flow Blue in the dishwasher.
Oh, wow.
So
They're getting the most out of theirs. I think if I had Flow Blue as my dishes, I would probably put in the dishwasher because I am notoriously opposed to hand washing.
Oh, yeah.
I've lived in 3 houses without a dishwasher. In fact, the one I'm in right now, it didn't have a dishwasher when we moved in. And it's become quite kind of a joke at how often I am willing to run the dishwasher and what I'm willing to put in there.
Same here. I'm putting pots. I don't care what, everything's going in the dishwasher.
Exactly. If it can't go in there, it's probably not going to be in my cupboard somewhere. But I would display it. And I would absolutely display Flow Blue because it's beautiful.
Let's jump in here for a second. There are several non-monetary ways you can support True Tales from Old Houses.
That is correct. The first is to tell a friend or your favorite Facebook group or your local historical society, basically anyone who loves old houses about the show. The second way is share us on social media. That's free. As you're listening to an episode, take a screenshot and share it with your friends and followers. The other non-monetary way you can help us is to leave us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We say it all the time because it's true. Those ratings and reviews help people find us and let them know that this show is worth a listen. And we got a very nice review this week, so thank you very much.
Now, if you're able, you can show us some love with a one-time or recurring donation over at the website, truetalesfromoldhouses.com. If you donate in the $20 to $25 range, we will send you an awesome coffee mug with the True Tales from Old Houses logo on it. Your generosity in all ways keeps the show afloat, and we appreciate it very much.
I have a question for you, and it's kind of a folklore question. And you and I have a mutual friend that lives locally to me, and he and I ended up in this, talk about places you never thought you'd end up before in your life. But he's an architect, and he is doing a project on a historic building that's fairly close to me. And part of the project, or part of the plan to do this project, is that they had to do an archaeological dig. It's required for historic buildings, depending on what the entire project entails. And when they did this archaeological dig, they pulled out not a whole lot of stuff, quite frankly, little odds and ends. But one of those things was a little blue and white piece of pottery. And he and I looked at each other, and we looked at this piece of pottery, and we said, oh, Leanne would love this. We're like, I think it's Flo Blue. I immediately reached out to you, or he did. I'm sorry, not me. He reached out to you and asked you about it. And did you think that what we found was a piece of Flo Blue?
Absolutely. And I get so excited when people send me little like shards of blue and white. It's like a fun little puzzle. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But yes, I absolutely do think that what you guys found was Flo Blue for sure. And I was like, what did it feel like? Was it thicker? Was it thinner? Was there a scallop on the edge? I was asking all these questions.
He was funny because he was sending me a message. He's like, do you remember? Was it thick? Was it thin? Did it have scallops on the edge? Well, I'll do my best. I don't exactly remember it. Something that happens to me on Instagram, and I love getting direct messages from people, but sometimes people think that I know more than I do after I share a certain story. So I got a question in my DMs from someone who said, so often I notice that people find shards of Flo Blue in fireplace ash dumps or buried around the house. She said, is there any meaning for that? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. That's a really good question. And she said, there's surely some sort of folklore attached to that. And I thought you might have an answer.
Sure. There is a lot of Flo Blue shards and glass bottles when people are gardening and digging in their yards. And from everything that I've read, garbage collection really wasn't how it is today. Like there wasn't a truck really that came and picked up on certain days. And back then there wasn't a ton of waste even. Like everything came in a glass bottle, and there wasn't all the packaging that we have today. And so people just went and had like a rubbish pit in their yard where they would just dump all their bones and cracked dishes and things like that. Or even out in their bathrooms, out like their outhouses, they would dump them in their little like toilet pits. And now we've built gardens over them and homes. And so when you're digging, you're basically just finding old trash pits and dumps that people use to dump their trash in. And that's what you're finding.
Okay, so there's not anything like it's lucky to bury your dishes in the garden, or you'll have 7 years of good luck if you put a piece of pottery in your ash dump for your fireplace.
No, I've never heard anything like that. I think it was just more out of practicality to just dump it.
Yeah.
So we're finding trash, which to us is awesome. We love it.
Yeah, I like Victorian trash. The Victorians were very into beauty, but they were practical people at heart. They had to find some place to take out the rubbish.
Absolutely. And a lot of the things, I guess if they were broken beyond repair or they could afford to easily replace it, they would just dump it. But a lot of pieces that you do see are repaired so intricately, and they take so much care to put it back together. So that piece obviously meant so much to one family, like staple repairs and everything. So it's really, really cool.
Tell me about the Flo Blue International Collectors Club. I saw your picture on their Instagram page. That was you, right?
Yes, actually, I am a fairly new member. I maybe only have been a member for about 2 years because my Flo Blue collecting has only really been for about that long. I haven't really been into it for too long, but I just went really hard once I discovered it. But the club is international. There's members in the UK, there's members in Israel, and the last convention last summer was in Pittsburgh, and people flew in from Israel and the UK and from all over the United States into Pittsburgh to come for the convention. It's a couple of days, and it's people that just love Flo Blue, collect it, that are experts in the field. Members of the club have written books that people buy to read about it. It's pretty awesome.
How lucky that it was in Pittsburgh too. What a wonderful turn of events for you.
Yes, it was awesome. My first one was in Pittsburgh. I didn't have to pay shipping for everything I bought at the auction. I just got to drive it home. So that was nice.
Yeah, that is really nice. So if somebody were interested in starting to learn about Flow Blue or maybe collect Flow Blue, where would you send them? Where would you direct them?
I would definitely direct them to 3 books by Petra Williams. She was a member of the club, and those are kind of like the Flow Blue Bibles, are what everyone in the club says. And I can send you those titles.
Yeah, that's great.
And then just anything you can get your hands on, Google, read. And the more you can, because everyone's like, how can you tell what's real, what's not? And I know this is an annoying question for a response to give to people, but just touching it and feeling it and getting a feel for what actual Flow Blue feels like is the best way to kind of get familiar with it and identify yourself with it.
That makes sense. I guess that would make something like an online auction a difficult way to start, because you might, I mean, whether or not a seller is purposely trying to dupe you that's another topic altogether. But, you may end up with a piece that's not true of Flow Blue.
Absolutely. And there's definitely those out there that say, antique Victorian Flow Blue. And I'm like, that is like 1980s.
Can you tell from a picture now? I mean, you just have just from your research, you can just look at a picture or see the mark on the back and know that that's not true?
Yes. With some, they're so obvious that the mark and just the coloring of the piece, you can just tell like that's one of the fake ones. But there are some really, really good ones out there that are very convincing. And I know there's a lot of old members of the club that have totally been fooled too. So they make very convincing reproductions out there. But I say, even if it's a reproduction, if you love it and it's beautiful and you still want it in your house, go for it. Why not?
All right. Anything else you'd like to share?
If you ever have questions about Flow Blue, and please message me pictures if you're out at an antique store and you're not sure what you're looking at, or you need to know a pattern or anything. I love getting those messages and pictures and, hey, what's this? Hey, how old is this? Do you know what pattern this is? Is this real? Is it fake? Anything. I love getting them. It's so fun for me. Just send away. I love it.
That's great. So your Instagram handle is @LadyOnChestnut. And we will also put that on the show notes so people can send you messages from garage sales, antique stores, grandma's basement, whatever. They'll send you messages.
Yes, of course. I love it.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's wonderful to talk to you more about Flow Blue, about your beautiful Victorian, the registered landmark that it is. And I'm sorry that Devyn couldn't be here. I know he missed it, and he really wanted to talk to you too. So I will make sure and tell him we had a wonderful conversation.
Yes, please do. And thank you so much for having me.
I'll see you on Instagram. Thanks again, Leanne. Bye.
We're so glad that you were able to join us. For more information about this episode, including show notes and transcripts, visit the website at truetalesfromoldhouses.com.
Until next time.
Bye for now.